Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wine.com Experiences. I'm Gwendolyn Osborne. Happy National White Wine Day. So excited about this. In order to celebrate, we will be tasting three incredible white wines from three wineries who are all pioneers in the what we call green movement, if you will, meaning they're actively promoting and educating and using sustainable, organic, and biodynamic practices. So this is going to be really a fantastic tasting. For those of you who submitted questions ahead of time, thank you so much. We're going to be trying to incorporate those through our conversation. If you purchase the wines ahead of time, also wonderful. Please go ahead, get those open, pour them into some glassware, and enjoy. Don't feel obligated to open all three, but I highly encourage it. These are really top quality wines that you can enjoy over the next few days if you can't finish all three tonight. But if you are looking for more detailed notes on these wines, you can find them on Wine.com. We have critics reviews, winery notes, videos, links to the wine pages, their own websites, and it's a fantastic place to learn a little bit more about them because they're wonderful wines. They've got great stories and histories behind them. The wines that we are tasting today in order are the Frog's Leap Sauvignon Blanc, the Grgich Hills Estate Chardonnay, and Tablas Creek Côte de Tablas Blanc. And here to help us drink them or taste them, excuse me, we have John Williams from Frog's Leap, Violet Grgich from Grgich Hills, and of course, Jason Haas from Tablas Creek. Welcome to you all.
Hi, Gwendolyn.
Hello.
Hi, Gwendolyn. How are you?
Wonderful. So great to have you all here. Really excited. Hold on, let me make sure I can see everybody. Okay, great. Happy National White Wine Day. Yay. So exciting. Okay.
Wait, we only get one day for white wine?
Right? I mean, I feel like that should just be all year long. I'm such a white wine fanatic myself.
White wine year.
White wine year. Let's take white wine year. Just a lot of wine year at this rate for 2020. But no, very excited about that, especially I'm in a warm climate this week. And so very refreshing and delicious wines to taste. I'm so excited to tell your stories as well. Because you're all really, pioneers, I think, for the sustainable organics, biodynamics, just taking care of the land and producing some of the best wine coming out of California right now. And so I'm so glad you're here to kind of talk about that for past, present, and future. Speaking of past, I kind of want to dive into a little bit of history to start. And John, I'm going to start with you. Frog's Leap, obviously this is a winery with a terribly fantastic sense of humor. But this was a bonded winery in 1981, but you kind of started leaning toward organics around 88, I believe.
Yeah, I think the mid 80s, we were starting to I came out of Cornell University and University of California, Davis agricultural programs, which was all, the green revolution and better life through science and more inputs was better. And I think a bunch of us were questioning that approach to agriculture in our food systems and in our lives. I think then being in viticulture, it was like, well, wait a second, what about viticulture? So that awareness was growing through the mid 80s. I found others who were thinking of the same things. People like Paul Dolan and Mike Benziger, and of course, Alan York, the godfather of us all. If you've never seen Big Little Farm.
We got you guys here.
Oh yeah, well, he's fantastic. So we started looking into this. My great mentor, the crazy looking guy on the end, is amico Bob Contasano, who, if you don't know him, is one of the great luminaries in the organic movement in all crops across California. This is actually myself and amigo and Frank Leeds, who started the first organic wine school that I know of, a viticultural school in 1989. There were 9 attendees there. But that program really grew, and we now limit that program to 250 people. It's run by the Grape Growers Association now. And so it was teaching, it was exploring, it was learning all together. Fantastic. And, there were many other people who were interested in organics about this time. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. And I mean, you followed that with not only organic practice, but you've also kind of incorporating so many other things like solar and LEED. And this is the winery. Is that solar panels in the background?
Yeah, in the background there, you can see the solar panels. They have to be washed, unfortunately. But I think all of us will address this. I think that as you become more interested in the principles of organic, and then as we got interested in biodynamics and the underlying philosophies of biodynamic anthroposophy, which was about the wholeness of nature, we started to see all these things interconnected. And so it was fine to grow your grapes organically, but where did your farm workers live? Did they have a livable wage? What were you building your buildings from? Where did your water come from? What about your power? What about all these things? And so I think all of us, kind of as an outgrowth of this interest in organics and biodynamics, for us, dry farming, very, very critical to what we do. All that grew into a greater consciousness that later on became known as this area of sustainability. And, we're focused on that now. Certainly the social equity part of sustainability is a big issue for us now, particularly during the pandemic and so on. So all these things lead to a greater appreciation of the way all these are connected. And I'm sure we'll hear this from Violet and Jason as well, is that it is this deep connection, not only the plant to the soil and to the living organism of the farm, but how we're all connected to this process. And quite honestly, to make wines of balance and restraint, and wines that speak to their terroir, they can't be grown any other way. It is that deep connection which makes the difference, quite honestly.
Yeah, and I like that, because I think that when we talk about sustainability and sometimes organics and the sustainability, and not only the plant to the soil, but also the person who picks the grapes, and then the person who works in the winery, and the whole long train of humans and plants and animals that all kind of interact in that. So I love that description. Violet, your Grgich Hills was founded in 1977. It's my own personal vintage as well. And Grgich Hills also went toward the organic practices before it was kind of, I don't want to say cool, but just before it was more widespread than it is. So I know this was your father who saw some potential in organic farming. What was his inspiration there?
Actually, it's a combination of things. My father grew up in a small, poor village in Croatia, which was part of Yugoslavia, and they didn't know any other kind of farming other than natural farming. But, coming to America and not yet having purchased all of our vineyards, we certainly relied on conventional farming. My father was so busy doing so many different things and running the winery. He always thought about organic, but never quite got around to it until apparently my cousin Evo was inspired by, thank you, my dear. My cousin Evo was inspired by John Williams, of all people, who tells me sometime around midnight at the Phoenician in Arizona, but apparently he convinced him that organic was the right way to go. And it actually makes a lot of sense. I know years ago, my father had made the 1969 Cabernet that made Robert Mondavi famous, but he did it using tons of technology and processing. And he got into a discussion with his friend who made wine in his garage, and his friend's wine, he had nothing. He had no technology. It was unfined, unfiltered. And he couldn't stop drinking his friend's wine because it was so delicious and because it was so natural. And that was in the early 70s. His winemaking and grape growing philosophy was essentially set that day because of that, doing as little as possible, creating the most natural grapes, produce the best grapes, making the best wine from that, and creating a wonderful cycle too.
Yeah, I think the buzzword that people like to use is the minimalist, but it's true of just kind of letting that do its work. And so I saw was that Evo in the vineyards that we just saw, smelling the dirt?
Yes, that was Evo in the vineyards.
And he's now continuing this tradition, correct?
Absolutely. So
after a nice late night with John.
Exactly.
There he is. Oh, that's great. No, these are fantastic wines. I know, are all of them estate grown?
Everything is estate grown. This is actually our Carneros vineyard that you're seeing there with the wine train in the background. So we started purchasing vineyards in 1977, our area in Rutherford. That's our American Canyon vineyard, which is beautiful. It's actually our coolest vineyard. We grow most of our Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc there. But yes, we became fully estate grown in 2003. We started farming organically in 2000, but weren't certified until a number of years later. We thought we were doing the right thing, but apparently consumers like to see it on the label itself.
So. Yes, they do. Like a good little label.
Absolutely.
True. But so Jason, let's move down south to Paso Robles, Tablas Creek, because you were kind of one of the starters of the Rhone movement, if you will, there in California, beginning in 1989 with a very cool partnership. What inspired you? You had the partnership with your late father and the Perrin family coming in to just plant Rhone varieties there. What was organic farming something that kind of went in at the very beginning, or was it something that kind of evolved? What was your inspiration?
So this is one of the things that we take directly from what they do at Beaucastel. For the people who don't know, we're co-founded by the Perrin family from Chateau de Beaucastel. And they've been working now for 5 generations in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And they've been fully organic since the 1960s. And that was something that happened that Jacques Perrin, who was the patriarch of the family, he had been using some chemicals in the years right after World War II, and decided in 1964 that he was going to go back for a year and farm the way that he had learned from his father. And he was blown away by how much more the wines that he made that year tasted to him like Beaucastel, like that place, than what he'd been doing for the previous decade. And for them, that was a kind of an aha moment. So they really feel like farming organically is part of the baseline of making wines that express your character of place. And so when we started here in 1989, that was part of the fundamentals of how we were gonna farm the vineyard. So we've evolved a little bit since then. I mean, we've incorporated more and more biodynamics starting in 2010. Right. You can see that's a nice overview from the top part of the vineyard that we have. And in Paso Robles, we've been able to incorporate a bunch of things like the owl box that you see there, like a flock of 250 sheep and alpacas that graze the vineyard. There they are. Yeah, there they are. And the whole idea is that we're trying to create a farm unit that is complete and balanced and resilient, that we don't need to intervene in. So it's partly a way of replicating the natural balance and controls that you would find in a wild ecosystem. And it's partially trying to make sure that your vineyard is as healthy and vibrant and resilient as possible, because that's going to allow it to make grapes that are going to make vibrant and alive wines.
Exactly. Speaking of which, I want to taste these wines. I'm ready to move on to the wine. So we're going to start with the Sauvignon Blanc. John, with you. I do want to point out before we do this, though, that your first gig was not Frog's Leap. You were actually there at Stag's Leap, helping out with the 1973 Cabernet that wowed the judges at the Judgment of Paris, correct?
I think it's fair to say that the 73 Cabernet that won the Paris tasting would not have happened without me.
Was you the only employee?
It was my first day on the job. We bottled the 73 Cab, and my job was to put the bottles and take them out of the case and put them on the bottling line. Now, can you imagine had I not done that properly? I mean, I may be one of the most important figures in the California wine history when you think about it. So I had to get those bottles on the line properly. And yes, I was.
Right. What would have happened to that tasting otherwise? But we did just do a talk with Steve Spurrier to talk about that. So I love that and then Violet will get to you.
We've kidded about it a few times. Yeah.
But Frog's Leap, when you started this, you didn't start with Cabernet and Chardonnay. You started with Sauvignon Blanc and Zinfandel.
Well, that's correct. In 1981, it was my friend Larry Turley and I who go back to the early days, and he actually introduced me to the Winyorskis to start Stag's Leap. Larry, of course, has gone on to start Turley Wine Cellars when we split up in '94. And he holds a lot of these ideals the same as we do, and does a marvelous job, particularly with the older vines, with the dry farming, all the things that we feel are critical. Yeah, to be honest with you, in '81 we were just horsing around, but people kept buying the wine and we kept making it. And now look at the trouble we're in. I tell everyone I'm a great success. I came to the Napa Valley in 1975 on the Greyhound bus for $40, and I'm now $22 million in debt. It's going real good.
It's going great, yeah. Didn't nobody ever told you you're supposed to start with $22 million and then spend it?
Yeah, that was the flaw in my plan.
Well, we're very grateful that you're making these wines. So Sauvignon Blanc, first vintage was 81 or 82?
81, yeah. Grapes
81,
from the
81.
Spotswood Vineyard at that time, yeah.
Okay, that's right. And then now where is this coming from? You're mainly from certain places in Rutherford?
Yeah, we're actually, this is an exciting vintage for us 2020, and this will be our first estate grown. We've been slowly accumulating vineyards, mostly here in Rutherford. And this wine, the 18, is all Rutherford, but it is not all estate. But we're making that. It's all certainly organically farmed. It's all dry farmed, which is critical to us. I can't overstate the importance of dry farming in our style of wine, which is all about balance and restraint, lower alcohol. These things are critical to us. And it's what I would say about this wine. It is, and we'll see it with the other wines as well. You can't produce wines like this, so natural, so pure, so balanced, so restrained, unless the vine has this deep connection to the soil, it employs its natural intelligence to get where mature at the proper sugar levels. Remember that the ripening of the grape is a biological imperative for spreading its seed. And so balance comes from the grapevine's ability to bring all these ingredients in its berry to this perfect moment, not to make wine in its view, but to spread its seed, to attract birds and spread its seed. But that's the very instinct that we employ to make great wines of balance. To have that instinct, to have that knowledge to bring these wines into perfect balance out in the vineyard, they need to be connected to their farming system through the roots and the deep biological world of the soil, but to the environment above the soil. And it takes clues from this deep biological world is what makes great wine. And that's really the power of organics and biodynamics and sustainable farming and dry farming. That's the real beauty of this, is to make wines like this, which can't occur otherwise. Otherwise, you're trying to recreate it through the winemaking process. And then that's when we run into all the additives and techniques and so on and so forth, which are not appropriate in making great wine, in our opinion.
Right. So let's taste this. I want to talk about the kind of the flavor profile as we taste it. Tell us what to kind of expect, and then keep incorporating that dry farming, because that seems to be one of the most integral parts of this, and what that kind of does to the vine and the grapes that come out of it.
Yeah, well, the Tao Te Ching, it says, "What is rooted is easy to nourish," and so a grapevine isn't going to root deeply if it's got plenty of water at the top of the surface, and really, so it's why irrigation is not allowed in all the other great wine growing regions of the world. And never used to be, you think about all the great wines that started the reputation of Napa, the great Mondavi wines that were mentioned, the Stag's Leap that won the Paris tasting, the old Inglenoks and BVs, all these were from, there was no irrigation in the Napa Valley until 1976. And so these great wines that established Napa, now I'd say easily 97, 98% of the vineyards are irrigated. We think that's changed the style of Napa wine, maybe not necessarily to the better. So we see dry farming as being part of this sustainable farming system, if you will, and this idea that a vine is deeply connected. You can smell the wine, the restraint in this wine, but the minerality, the freshness, the vibrancy, the aliveness, that all comes from this deep connection to the soil, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and there is such, your wines are, to me, I think restrained is a great word. They're very, I hate to use the word European, but yes, blind tasting, I would never say, oh, clearly a Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc. This is not what I recommend to people who say they like classic Napa Valley Sauvignon Blanc, because of that restraint and that minerality.
Yeah, we're very much inspired by the wines of Europe for sure, but we don't try to copy them, and I think that's a mistake that some people make as well. We're not trying to make a faux Loire. Right. We're really trying to be, and I've spent way too much time in Sancerre, and to be inspired by that, I think is cool. To try to copy that is not cool, in my opinion.
Right. No, you still want to be Californian, just not. There are some wines that are a little bit more richly textured, and not that I'm trying to say that those they're wrong, but the restraint. I think the word restraint, when you talk about that, is that it's almost like you're pulling all that minerality out of them, kind of letting the vine dig deep and get that. So this is a
we don't think about white wines as expressing terroir so much, and I think that's a big mistake. And I think what we're going to see in all the wines that we taste today is that it's why I think white wines are considered to be lesser than red wines, because we speak of terroir when we speak of red Burgundy or Clair, the wines of Bordeaux, but there's very much terroir in white wines as well. and if they're connected and if they're made with this much passion, like all the wines we're going to try today. And I think exploring the terroir of white wines opens you up to all kinds of new opportunities to drink white wine with more passion than you might. Certainly on White Wine Day, we should anyway.
I mean, I actually probably drink more white wine than I do red wine, and I love the complexities of white wine. I love the layers of white wines, and I drink white wine with great passion. So I hope that we can spread that passion to others. And just a note to everybody, just this is what we're drinking, the Frog Slate, but I've always enjoyed the label and the wines that you do finish in cork. Yellow ribbit.
This is the first vintage that we've finished with the roll-on cap, and we're kind of excited about what it's doing for the wine, and it certainly makes it easy to drink it and put it back in the refrigerator, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. I'm a huge fan, and this is just a beautiful wine, 12.7 alcohol, which is great. It's very, very pretty. Thank you. It's delicious. Okay, let's move on to the Chardonnay, Violet. So. Okay, so your father was also involved in the 1976 tasting, if we can point that out, because he was behind the Chateau Montelena Chardonnay that won the Judgment of Paris, put California wines on the map. What did your father love so much about Chardonnay?
Well, interestingly enough,
or was it just his first job? Yeah.
Well, he was actually hired by Chateau Montelena to make Cabernet. And once he put the balance sheet together and showed them there was going to be no income for 5 years, they were a little petrified, to say the least. And so his idea was to make a Chardonnay that he'd be able to put on the market, but it's the great white wine of Burgundy. So besides great complexity, great longevity, he really felt it was the perfect companion wine to Cabernet Sauvignon. And so he really hadn't made one in his past. And the second one that he made, actually the first one, the 72, both of those were in tastings with the same French wines in San Diego a year beforehand. And each of those won either one or two over Bitard Montrachet, a few others that were also included in the Paris tasting. But of course, the French decided that because the wines traveled, that was not a good result of the tasting. So when our wines traveled to France and beat them again with French judges, that was even more astounding.
Yes, that was very exciting. So it's not too shabby for your second vintage, I'd say. Maybe he had a knack for it. So I guess kind of in a way, Chardonnay is a little bit of your flagship, although I know the Cabernet is phenomenal, and you make a lot of great Cabernet as well. And all our estate grown, as we talked about this. But what do you think? Can you share what you think, just from from organics, what makes a great Chardonnay vineyard, either by place or method?
Well, it's a combination of factors. Our Chardonnay grows mostly in American Canyon, which is the coolest area of Napa Valley, and then also in Carneros, which is a little bit warmer than that. There's a great diversity of soil. It's a wonderful microclimate. You need that coolness in order to produce grapes that have the proper balance of acid, as well as wonderful aromas and flavors. And also another factor is the fact that we farm organically. We actually farm regeneratively, regenerative agriculture, which is something that my cousin Ivo has been experimenting with the last year, which goes a step beyond. It's actually been the only thing that hasn't worked with our either plain organic farming or biodynamic farming, which we did for a while, which is the ability to actually have the plant protect itself from disease by utilizing and feeding microbes, which thereby feed the plant. So we also dry farm, and there's no way that you can get that exquisite terroir and minerality without having roots that go way down deep into the soil. So it's really an amazing expression. And talking about terroir, so much, John, of what you said really echoes with us as well. We make wines that are elegant, that are restrained, that are European. So being Croatian peasants, we like to drink wine that we can drink every day and not get tired of. And a wine that is restrained, elegant, and has balance will taste a little bit different every day. And in fact, when we do vintner dinners, I tell people, open each wine, have each wine with each course, but save each wine. Try them with every course. See how they age. I actually had, I opened my wine about almost an hour ago, and it's gone through such an amazing transition. It's so much better now than when I first opened it. So it's something I
opened mine about an hour ago as well, and it's evolved. It's just evolved a lot. And And I share that with people too, is sometimes just don't go too fast, because if your last glass is the best one, then it's just,
Just need another bottle.
right. Well, then you just get another bottle. But let's taste through this. I kind of want to talk about also kind of the methods, whether or not you use malolactic and your oak choices on this wine as we go through it.
Mm-hmm. So this wine, it's absolutely beautiful. Has an incredibly complex nose. It's got this one is a little bit more on the tropical side, with notes of pineapple, a little bit of peach, a little bit of honey as well. But you get that wonderful minerality, which you really get from organic farming, dry farming. And then on the flavor, it's a wonderful combination of richness, but also crispness. And my favorite compliment that I get all the time from people is, I don't like Chardonnay, but I love yours, because it's not made to be overly anything. It's meant to be in balance. And how we make this wine, we actually go through barrel fermentation. We used to go through stainless steel, but we found that barrel fermentation actually helped incorporate the oak a little bit better and harmonize more and faster than you would be if you simply aged it after fermentation. And our whole philosophy with oak is very much like when you cook, you add salt to dishes. You don't add salt to make things salty. You add salt to enhance the flavors. So the oak is there to enhance the fruit, to enhance the flavors, not to make the wine oaky. It also helps build wonderful texture. We do not go through malolactic fermentation. A lot of people say, oh, I make a Burgundian style wine and therefore I go through malolactic, but it's really a function of the climate. You know, we are actually cooler here in Napa Valley than they are in Burgundy. Back in the old days when their climate was cooler than ours, they had to go through malolactic to make their wines drinkable. And so they still had high acidity. But once you start getting warmer and warmer, sugar goes up, acid goes down, and then you lose that balance. So we really want to maintain that freshness and crispness of that wonderful malic acid, which comes from apples. And that gives it that wonderful, wonderful complexity.
Absolutely. I love Chardonnay. And I do love the Chardonnay. One of my favorite things to do is to give Chardonnay to people who say they don't like Chardonnay. To show them that
So much fun.
Because it is such a wonderful, diverse grape. But yeah, this is just, it's beautiful. It's just so well balanced. It has that terroir. It has that wonderful, rich fruit. The yin and yang of the mineral and the richness is just really lovely. It's quite pretty. Yeah, so thank you. Okay, we're gonna move down to Paso Robles again. Again, we talked a little about the history, Jason, of Tablas Creek, and being part of the Bocastel family and that partnership. And in doing that, you imported the vines from Theron into California, correct?
Yeah, we realized at the beginning that there were some grape varieties that we wanted to use that had never been used in the United States before. So that meant grapes like Counoise and Picpoul and Grenache Blanc. If we wanted to plant them, we needed to import them. And that also gave us the opportunity to bring in some new clones of some varieties that were here but didn't have a great reputation. So we brought in new clones of Grenache and Mourvedre, Roussanne, Viognier, and we've now decided that some of those ones that we didn't expect a huge amount from have been so successful that we decided to bring in all the Chateauneuf varieties. So that's one of the exciting things that we have this year, is that we have a couple of new varieties that have never been produced in the United States before that came into production this year, and we got our last of the Chateauneuf varieties grafted into the vineyard last year. So anybody who's been desperately waiting for Muscardin from California, we'll have it next year.
Yes. So exciting. But I also know that turned into you having a nursery. And just from a personal experience, in 2005, I visited there and you gave us a tour, and I got to graft my first vine. I think that was the only time I've actually grafted. But it was a very cool experience to kind of actually understand and bring that, from reading about it into actually doing to graft a vine. So I know you still have an active nursery going, right?
Yeah, we decided Well, first of all, we needed to reproduce the vines that we brought through quarantine to plant for our own vineyard. I mean, you're only allowed to bring in 6 cuttings of any particular clone into the quarantine process, and that's obviously not enough. So you have to grow those vines, pot those vines up, grow them, cut them into individual single bud sections, root them, pot them. It requires some infrastructure to make this happen. And we decided early on, whatever I say we, I was in high school. I was not making this decision. My dad and the parents decided early on that we were not going to try to keep these vines proprietary, but instead we were going to make them available to any other growers who wanted to buy them, because we felt that the biggest thing that was holding back the category of Rhone varieties in California was that the clonal material wasn't great, or in some cases didn't exist. So starting in '96, which was the first year that we had enough surplus vines that we could sell any, we started selling vine cuttings. And in the last 25 years, we've sold 5 million grapevine cuttings to 600 vineyards up and down the West Coast. And I feel like it's played an important role in helping really kick off the Rhone Rangers movement that we're a part of.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when you support the category, that helps you grow as well.
Yeah. I mean, we felt like people knew Chardonnay, they knew Sauvignon Blanc, but most American consumers didn't know Rhone varieties at all. And just getting the category a little more established and have a little more presence, we felt confident in our ability to stay at the front of the category, but you can only be as successful as your community. And we felt this was a way of helping our community succeed.
Great. And so you have obviously all the grapes are such enough to pot planted. So which varieties are into this Côte de Tablas Blanc?
So the Côte Blanc is our chance to highlight Viognier. And that's probably the most familiar of the Rhone whites for most American consumers. But it's important to realize that it's not a major grape in the southern Rhone, which is where Beaucastel is, and which is where really our climate was picked to match up well with the southern Rhone. So in the southern Rhone, Viognier makes wines that are really exuberant, very floral, very peachy, lush, rich, but they tend not to have a lot of minerality. They tend not to have a lot of acidity. And so typically in the southern Rhone, they're blended. And in this wine, we blend Viognier with Grenache Blanc and Marsanne, and then a little bit of Roussanne. So each of them kind of shores up one of Viognier's weak points. Grenache Blanc has great acidity. Marsanne has elegance and minerality and low alcohol. And Roussanne has structure. So when you add each of those to that Viognier core, you end up with something that still has Viognier's exuberance, but doesn't have its weaknesses.
Right. Yeah, so it gives it that the roundness. It's the magic of the blend. It's why blends are so popular in the Rhone, and why Rhone blends end up doing so well. So I want to taste through this, maybe kind of talk us through what we're tasting, maybe from each grape as well, and then kind of, I want to talk a little bit also about how, when you move to biodynamics, that might have changed a little bit of the flavor profile, maybe during tasting or after it, whichever works best.
So, okay, so in terms of what people might smell and taste if they're trying this wine, aromatically, for me, I get a balance of Viognier's fruit and floral, and then Grenache Blanc's kind of citrusy pith. There's a little bit of bite to Grenache Blanc, which I think is a really important piece of a blend. And I feel like I smell both of those. And then on the palate, you sort of feel the different pieces at different parts of your mouth. So I think the first thing that I taste in this is that fruity, peachy, kind of peach pit character. And then as it goes deeper into the mouth, the things that are brighter and higher acid come out. So you feel a little more of that preserved lemon character that you might get from Grenache Blanc, or a little bit of like the honeydew melon that you would get from Marsanne. And then the very last thing that I feel on the end is a little bit of the structure of Roussanne, where you get almost a little bit of tannin to it, which sounds like a strange thing to talk about with a white wine, but there's a little bit of a feel from Roussanne that feels similarly to tannin in the mouth. So, and ideally, we don't want people to be like, oh, right, there's the Viognier. Oh, right, there's the Marsanne. Oh, right, there's the Grenache Blanc. But they should each play together with with each having like the occasional chance to do a little solo. Like think of this in terms of a band. Like you don't want to be only listening to the bass or to the drums or to the guitar, but you want different points where one of them jumps out and you're like, oh, that's a really cool lick, or that's a really cool drum pattern.
Yeah. Guys, I love that comparison. And yes, I mean, this is a blend, but we're kind of geeking out here talking about tasting. So I thought we'd kind of go into that. But yeah, the idea of that blend is to kind of meld those wonderful components together so that it is like an orchestra that comes through. So
one of the things that I think is important is that sometimes people feel like if it's a blend, it must be like you're trying to cover up for your weaker grapes. I think of it as being like, think of it as like a band. Like you can't have any weak parts in that. You can't have like if your bassist can't keep time, or like your singer is off tune, like it's going to ruin the whole thing. They've all got to be good, but you get something out of the harmony of all of them that you can't get from any one individual.
Right. And you might not always be able to pinpoint what it is that's making it so good, but that's okay because it's making it good.
Right. Exactly.
Kind of like that. I don't know. I'm loving this band analogy. I'm trying to like follow along.
I can go for
I'm sure
a lot longer.
No, I like it though. I think it's a very good way to talk about blends.
But I do want to talk a little bit about that to address the second part of your question, which was about the impact of biodynamics on our farming, or rather on the flavor of what you taste. So we started farming 20 acres, a 20-acre slice of the vineyard biodynamically in 2010. And honestly, it was after a visit up to Grgich that my dad and Neil Collins, who's been our winemaker and vineyard manager from the beginning, they made a trip up there and came back inspired enough that not only was this a good idea, but it was feasible, that we should try implementing it. So we took a 20-acre slice of the vineyard and decided to farm that fully biodynamically. And if you'd asked us at the time what our hope was, we would have said that it was to keep the vines healthy and alive longer, because this is a stressful place, Paso Robles. I mean, it's routinely 100 degrees during the day. It drops down into the low 50s at night. It doesn't rain between April and November. And these vines are under a lot of stress. So we figured if we can implement biodynamics and keep the vines healthy and productive longer, the real impact on quality would be down the road, where we wouldn't have to replace our grapevines at age 25 or 30. We'd get them to 40 or 45 or 50. But the first stage in our blending process every year is that we taste lot by lot, each lot of every varietal that we make. So we might taste 8 different Viognier lots and 9 Grenache Blanc lots and 14 Roussanne lots. And we did this in 2010. And after we revealed what had gotten different rankings of ours, we noticed that all of the lots that came from the biodynamic slice were towards the top of the rankings. We're like, oh, that's interesting. Same thing happened in 2011. And it wasn't like we cherry picked that 20-acre slice that it was our best slice of vineyard. It had everything from high points to low points, thin soils to thick soils, a whole bunch of different varieties. And so for us, those wines, they just had a little bit more electricity. They were a little more alive. They tasted a little more like the varieties that they were supposed to be. And so we decided it was silly not to try to expand that. So the next year in 2012, we expanded that to 40 acres and gradually, bit by bit, expanded till we had the whole vineyard farmed biodynamically in 2016. And I don't think it's a coincidence that our last few vintages since 2016, I think is the best run we've ever had. And I think that the farming is definitely a piece of it.
It makes a difference. So I think that any thoughts on each other's wines?
They're really
I have to say about Jason's wine, he probably knows this, one of the best-selling wines at Mustards, and it would not be if I wasn't buying almost all that wine at Mustards. And with respect to Violet, there are very few California Chardonnays I drink, and I buy yours by the case. Absolutely lovely, and all the things she said. So these are lovely wines I enjoy my company today because I can drink these wines, and that means a lot to me. So hats off to both of you. These are delicious
and
wines.
Violet, I know you and John are like neighbors too. So
we're neighbors too. John's one of my favorite people. And, but I guess it's just so interesting that all the influence we have on one another, it's like this amazing community. And, I remember years ago, I was in a CEO roundtable of all small, medium, and large. And actually John was part of there too. And people in other industries like, what do you mean? You're all competitors. What are you doing there? And we're like, well, we're helping each other, and we're, helping this guy be more profitable and this guy more creative and commenting on their wines. It's just, it's a community that's amazing. And I think when you make something that takes such passion, the passion that you put into it, you get out of it. We don't farm organically because it's the right thing to do. It truly is. It makes the wines like the spirit, your spirit, the spirit of the earth. I didn't mention this, but the only way you're able to ferment with wild yeasts is by farming organically and retaining all of those beautiful microorganisms. So all of these every year there's a different population. And so literally our wines are literally of the time and of the place, and it makes them alive. And that feeling of life and energy is something you can't recreate if you're just trying to, turn a profit every year. We're in this for the long haul. Jason talking about, let's keep our vines growing longer. The older vineyards get, the more complex grapes they produce, and therefore the vines. You save on costs, but you end up having exquisite wines. We're planning on being in this business for many, many generations to come. And really the only way of doing that is by farming in the most natural way. So, and it literally makes a wine that, I've been drinking my dad's wines and now my cousin's wines like every day, and I'm still not tired of them. So that says a lot.
That is definitely something to be said.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, were you enjoying any of these wines also? Oh.
No, I was going to say, my father just turned 97. So,
oh my gosh, that's amazing. It must be the wine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, these are lovely, and I love the comments that both John and Violet have made about community, because one of the things that I think does set apart, particularly the community of wineries that are farming organically and biodynamically, is that everybody is really in it to see everyone else succeed. I mean, we all believe that the more people who are farming this way, the better it is for us, the better it is for our customers, the better it is for the communities that we're a part of. And so just the openness that everyone has to sharing ideas, to sharing techniques, to giving advice, to opening their cellars, it's inspiring. And it's one of the most fun things about this. And I love Violet's analogy to like the CEO roundtable. It's like, aren't you competitors? It's like, no. Is somebody who buys a bottle of Grgich or a bottle of Frog's Leap less likely to buy a bottle of Tablas Creek? No, I would say that they're more likely to buy a bottle of Tablas Creek. So if we can support other people who are farming and making wine in ways that we believe are really worthwhile and worthy of emulation, like that's good for everyone.
It is. And I will say also that not only good for the community and good for each other, but also good for the planet. And so I'm going to segue into my last question here. Well, I'd like for you each to touch on, if we could, of just, we're talking about creating wines that are sustainable, that are part of the earth. And so I can be remiss not to mention that, our climate is changing kind of drastically. And that's going to change a lot of agriculture, including grapes. And so maybe if you could each kind of touch on how that might change, how that might make what you're doing even more important. And also, are you seeing any changes that you need to make? And Violet, I was gonna start with you on that one.
Well, I think, we've been thinking about this a lot, and my, cousin especially, this is his passion. He spends most of his time in the vineyards. And the fact that organic farming and natural farming actually helps reduce greenhouse gases. It is something that if everybody could do this, it would certainly change the world. It not only feels better, my son, when he was, a year old, his favorite food was grapes. And so I have this picture of him like reaching up for the grapes. And I never thought I would feel this way, but I'm like, it is perfectly safe for him to be doing that in our vineyards because it is totally natural. So there's something that makes it a bigger part of the community. It is truly the right thing to do. It makes you feel good in so many different ways. And would definitely love to see it spread.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, what about you? Have you seen?
So Violet mentioned regenerative organics, which I think, people have heard about organics. They're starting to hear about biodynamics. I really think regenerative organics is going to be the next critical thing. And that incorporates the elimination of chemicals that you get with organics. It incorporates a focus on soil health and microbial health like you get in biodynamics. But it also incorporates things like carbon capture through cover cropping, through ways of returning that carbon to the soil, like a grazing flock of sheep and alpacas. And it also incorporates resource use reduction. So dry farming or having to being able to minimize inputs from the outside. And it includes both human welfare and animal welfare components, so that it's really designed to create a kind of a gold standard in sustainable farming. And I think that there's going to be an announcement this week from the coalition that's been putting all of this together. But anybody who wants to see a little bit about it, do a Google search for regenerative organic, and you'll end up on the Regenerative Organic Alliance website. And it's the future. And it's not just about wine. It's about row crops. It's about orchards. It's about livestock. It's basically ways that farming can be a part of solving some of the big problems in the world. And their slogan is "Farm like the world depends upon it," because it does.
Yes, it does. Yeah, that's great. And thank you for mentioning that. And John, what about you?
Well, I absolutely agree with my colleagues. I mean, we have to look at both ways to mitigate the effects of climate change in our vineyards, but also what can we do as businesses to slow down the onset of climate change. These are all things that I think all responsible vintners are considering and putting into play. I always like to hesitate at this point, though, and mention that climate change isn't a wine industry problem. It's a human problem. And that if we think that all these things can be solved by the wine industry, we're barking up the wrong tree. I often get a question of, well, I hear your Cabernet isn't going to be so good in 2050 because of climate change. And I always go, yeah. And I hear that all of our coastal cities are going to be inundated and there's going to be widespread desertification, migration, a collapse of the global economy, and widespread famine. And my Cabernet isn't going to taste so good. And so I hesitate to make this too much of a problem of the wine industry. I mean, everyone wants it to be someone else's problem. Look into this screen, you guys. It is our problem, and we have to take it on, each and every one of us. We're part of the Porto protocols, and the challenge is very simple in that, and I think it's what I would put out to anyone listening to this to tell someone else. And the challenge is simple. If you're doing nothing, do something. If you're doing a little bit, do a little bit more. And if you're doing a lot, like most of us speaking today, find new ways to challenge yourself. And I will tell you this, Frog's Leap will find new ways to challenge itself. And we are, like regenerative farming, like microgrids, so on and so forth. But if you're doing nothing, you shouldn't be part of this conversation, and that's not cool. So let's all make this a challenge to all of us, because this is a big problem for all of us.
But I do think that you're right, that all of you who we're speaking to right now are doing a lot. And I think that it's a learning process of what can we do and what can we do more. So the regenerative that you're both doing, and I mean, you've already been doing something by doing the wines that you're doing, and that's exciting as well. So there's a lot ahead of us in agriculture and in life. But I appreciate you all taking the time to talk about your wines and your stories. They're incredible wines. National White Wine Day. Yay!
Yay!
Hey, cheers to that. I'm so excited. No, I really appreciate you being here. For those of you at home, I hope you learned a lot about, the great stories behind all of these wines and wineries and people. And if you are still not drinking the wine, they're still available on Wine.com, of course. So thank you, John, Violet, Jason, for being here. I hope you have a fantastic rest of your National White Wine Day. I'm certain that I will. Cheers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Cheers.
Cheers.
Good to see you, John and Violet. Thank you for everything that you guys both do.
Great
All right.
to see you guys too. So
See
hopefully
you on the
more.
way home, Violet.
Cheers.
It's both a science and a form of high art. It's made from the combination of grapes, sunlight, rain, soil, and time. It's raised up in the moments that matter. It's wine. And we are Wine.com. We have the largest wine selection in the world, online sommeliers with free advice, and now our powerful new app puts the entire world of wine in your hands. Wine.com. Seriously passionate about wine. Download our free app today.